Hey, Chris from MakerMade. Here is a quick intro to the Makerverse application, which is our customized version of CNCJS that is targeted for the M2, trying to make things a little bit easier for everybody when setting up the machines and running some calibration. So I'll go ahead and get plugged in to the computer. And you'll notice that the baud rate is actually set at the 38400 by default in the application, just so one less thing to have to remember to do for the M2. I'll hit the refresh. You'll see the connection jumps up. You may have to click the connect button. Once you've done your connection, though, it will remember your machine. And then it will auto reconnect once it sees that device selection in the port. One thing you'll notice is we now have this M2 configuration widget below, and none of these buttons are selectable currently because we have a alarm. That alarm is okay, that is common, that is expected. That is just so that you can't accidentally hit a button and start your machine without meaning to. So it's really just a fail-safe in the software that makes you purposefully interact with the application. So just pressing unlock unlocks the state. Now this machine has already been homed previously, so I don't have to press home, just the unlock. The board itself stores its homing information, so that is not something that you have to do every single time that you connect to your machine to run some G-code. You just have to do the unlock. The first time you do it, you do have to do an unlock, you do have to do the homing. Now if your sled is centered in your wasteboard and you just want to have a routine of pressing home, you can do that if you want to. It's not going to hurt anything. The only time that it will have an impact on your calibration is if the sled was not returned to its previous home in the middle of your wasteboard, and then you press the home, then it will recalculate some of these scaling factors on its own, and that could have an impact to the accuracy of your machine. So definitely recommend either just maintaining that one homing and not pressing the homing button anymore, or just return your sled back to the middle of your wasteboard if you are going to press the homing button. Okay. Jumping into some of the M2 specific features of the Makerverse application, we have the Workspace. So pressing on change the size of the workspace, this will show you what those values are that we're looking at and give you the ability to make edits rather quickly. Now obviously the width is everything is laid out in the image for you. And they also have the ability to change the units. I know a lot of people in the States, it's hard to buy a metric tape measure, so we do everything in inches. So if you're doing like these large measurements, you can change it to inches, type in your value, and then we'll do the metric conversion on the back end and update it in the firmware. So I'm just going to cancel out of this so that we can move through some of the other things. The machine settings, this is one of the big ones that you'll see in the firmware, and the calibration is very dependent on these values here. So very similar. You have the image here that will help you understand what it is asking you in these fields. You have the ability to modify the increment if you're going to unit of measure millimeters or inches, and then after you edit those, press save, and then in the configuration. So now if we go into calibration, this is where you get into actually making those tweaks and compensating for those random variances. Now this is the machine itself comes with the default values that were statically generated in our shop, in our prototype environment, where we had very accurate, precise control over all of the measurements. With that said, we are asking for frames to be built using dimensional lumber purchased from stores. Not, some of these boards are going to be 96 inches and an eighth, or there could have a little bit of warp that affects some of these things. So that's where this scaling comes into play. This is that final tweak. So with that, in the yellow image here, you'll see a square in the center of the wasteboard. We just ask that you just design a square. You can use easel. We can put a file online for everybody if that's helpful. And then just do it close to a meter if you can. 800 millimeters seems to really work well for me. And just cut the square. And what you'll do is then you'll measure the width of the square, and then that is your X scaling. And then so if I'm going to do 800 millimeters, I'll do 800 millimeters width, and say my actual width was 790. Well, now when I hit save, it's going to generate a new metric for me for my scaling value. So what you'll see in the console here is this 100 equals 128.607, super long value. Now, when you look here, it doesn't update here, and that's fine because we don't want to do like a live back and forth and clog up all the connections. So if you want to see that number update, you can just hit close and then reopen again. And then when you come back down, you'll see, okay, that value has been successfully updated to what we used in the calibration. And then what you would then do is you would come back in to this and rerun that square. I know it can be a pain to just be cutting squares over and over and over again, but I can say that taking the time to do this early on, just give yourself an hour tops to do all of these little calibration and tweaks, and then you'll be good. Now the great thing is all of this calibration data is stored directly on the board itself. None of this is stored in the software. The Makerverse application does not house any of your calibration data. It is all specific to the memory chip on the actual control box itself. So if you have multiple computers that you use, none of that is going to have an impact on your calibration itself. The machine will still function properly. All of these values within the software are retrieved directly from the board every time you make a connection to it. So have no fears there. So you have all of that. To bring G-code in, you just press the upload, and then you'll just find a G-code, a NC file, and then that will load it in this area. And then once that is loaded, then you'll go in and press the play button, and then that will actually initiate your cut. One thing I do recommend is after you have everything zeroed, you have your Z-axis zeroed, you have all of that stuff done, before you press the play, go ahead and jog your Z just up a couple millimeters just to make sure that it's not going to mar the surface, and it'll give you some clearance for when you turn the router on. The other thing is you're going to want to turn the router on prior to pressing this play, because once you hit play, it's going to go ahead and start driving on the tool paths themselves. So give yourself a couple millimeters, turn the router on, then press play, then it'll go straight into your cut. So hopefully everybody, hopefully this makes a lot of things easier for everyone. and looking forward to getting everybody's feedback tomorrow when this goes live.